Landlords can make several costly mistakes that can lead to financial losses, legal issues, and tenant dissatisfaction. And here's a summary of the common mistakes landlords should avoid. One of the first mistakes that we make, and I just finished talking about this, was inadequate tenant screening. I'm going to be honest with you. No matter how big your heart is, unless you are doing this with no expectations for a profit, you must recognize when a tenant is a high risk tenant that is not likely to pay the rent, because one of the biggest mistakes is failing to thoroughly screen potential tenants that can lead to the result in renting to individuals who may not pay rent on time or could damage the property and not pay any rent at all. And once you give them that possession of premises, you have to go through a long ruling process where now you have to pay money to put them out of the house and then staple that to their bill, where if they own nothing, they have nothing, you really can't take anything from them. You can only wrap up the fact that they get off of your land, but you lose out on all of the back rent that they didn't pay you, and you lose out on all of the cost of court to get them put out of the property. The other issue that you have is that you can't take, with these bad tenants, you can't take self-help techniques like locking them out of the house, or if they're in the basement, locking them in the basement, or turning off any of the utilities, or anything to that effect. Because if you have any type of verbal or nonverbal lease agreement with them, they have a legal right to be there. And that means that a lot of states that have squatters' rights, where once they've been granted permission or their possession on the premises was not revoked after a period of time, you have to evict squatters. You have to evict people who are trespassing on your property, who've been trespassing for an extended period of time without your knowledge. You have to trespass them off of the property by going through the legal process of evicting them, and all of that stuff takes a lot of time. So you have to make sure that you have a plan of action, but your plan of action must be a tentative one, and it has to be a very thorough one. So one of the solutions that we have is that you're supposed to be able to implement a comprehensive tenant screening process that includes credit checks, rental history, and background checks. And when you're doing credit checks and rental history, you can do a hard pull on the three major credit agencies, because they're not bureaus. There's only one credit bureau, but the three major credit agencies. And then you can also do a criminal background check, which shows what they've been to court for. Now, what they've been to court for doesn't just talk about how many times they've gone to jail and what they've gone to jail for. It also talks about when they've ever had civil litigation against them, where somebody sued them for something, whether it's a car insurance or lawsuits for possession of premises. That is a legal term for eviction. And then also you have bankruptcies, where lawsuits for non-payment of assets. All of these things lead to showing whether or not the tenant is trustworthy with payments. Now, the rental history is what notes do the landlords put on the tenant's public record about their rental status. Now, those notes that they put down typically lead you to be able to understand whether or not they're able to take good care of the property. Because if previous landlords say, oh, they destroyed the place, they left a bunch of crap all over the place, stuff like that, then you're in a situation where you're going to rent to this person. They might break your house and then leave and not pay the rent. You've got to think about an individual where you're like, oh man, you're homeless, I'll give you a place to stay. Some people don't have a place to live because they got evicted for non-payment of the rent. They didn't try to rectify it. And now they're trying to go rent somewhere else, and nobody wants to take a person who doesn't pay the bill. You're going to try to open up your doors to them and try to give them a hand. But then the problem with that scenario is that if they didn't pay the other guy, the likelihood, since they never paid off that debt, is that they're not going to pay you either. They get in, they might pay you the first month, they might pay you the first 2 or 3 months, and then all of a sudden you're back to the drawing board where for some reason they don't got it on time. You charge them interest. If they can't afford to pay the base rate, they're not going to be able to pay the inflated rate. So they'll give you stuff, they'll give you something. And then after a while, they're going to owe you more than what they're paying you. And you're going to get tired of it. And you're going to be going through the eviction process, putting them back out again. This is the reason why you should check the rental history. Never do business with friends, because if you do business with friends, they will either you're going to ruin your friendship for sake of business. If they're not going to work well with you, they're either going to ruin your friendship for the sake of business, where you're going to cut ties because this isn't financially successful for you, or you're going to be in a situation where you're going to take a massive loss out of loyalty to your friendship. In either situation, if you're not benefiting from your friend, I've told you guys beforehand, just don't do it. Don't do it. Now, another thing, not understanding legal responsibilities. Mistakes that landlords make is the ignorance of landlord-tenant laws and safety standards can lead to legal disputes and fines. So one of the requirements that you have to do is familiarize yourself with the local regulations and legal obligations related to property management and tenant rights. Now, that's going to mean that you guys got to know, like, how many lights has got to be on. And this is like, if you're not going to keep the place in tip top shape, you have to understand that you got to get out there and maintenance the yard. You got to maintenance the roof. You got to repaint walls. You got to be able to go and do inspections when the tenant is available, at their convenience, not necessarily yours. And then you've got to be able to make sure that everything stays up to code. Now, I can tell you that that's going to be a hard thing to do when it comes down to making sure that the things are up to code, but the tenants have certain rights. They have, in certain states like Florida, they have a right to air conditioning. If they don't have that, then you're going to have a problem. They have certain places like New York where there's a right to have, reasonable heating. So if the heating isn't working, you're up a creek without a paddle. If certain fixtures aren't working, you're going to be dealing with some problems. So if your goal is not to keep the place in tip-top condition, which also means that you need to figure out a way to get an inspection done. The more frequently you do an inspection, the more successful you can keep the place up to code. But tenants are not going to be okay with the landlord coming and walking through the house every month. They're going to be a little bit uncomfortable about that. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of landlords put the burden of maintenance on the tenant, where the tenant reports that maintenance is needed. And then once they report it, then the landlord goes over there and goes and sees what he can do about it. Now, some of the tenants that damage the property themselves, it's not normal wear and tear. Those tenants probably won't tell the landlord, and then they will they'll leave it like that until they get ready to move, and then you'll start seeing them spackle walls and repaint and everything like that on their way out the door to repair the damage of the unit before they leave, so that the landlord doesn't say, oh, hey, this was a problem. This is a problem because of X, Y, and Z. I'm like, shoot, take pictures when you walk through the door. So if stuff don't look right, my dude, hey, it would like that when I got here. Got a date stamp. One of the other things that we have that's a common mistake is that getting a poor maintenance company, because the neglecting property maintenance typically is a mistake when you're renting a property, because the tenant isn't always responsible for maintaining the yard and stuff like that. So if the grass doesn't get cut on a regular basis, even if it's in a contract for the renter to do those things, if the property owner isn't making sure that it's getting done, code enforcement will penalize the landowner, not the renter of the land, which that means that the landowner would then have to pay the cost, and that would sever the the positive engagement between a tenant and a landlord, because I mean they're not taking good care of the property, and now you've got to go take care of the property.